online here, which is good. Okay, Sasha, we're going to start, yeah? Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jerry Cunningham, and I'm your moderator for our second side event here at COP28. And this side event, again, is in collaboration between my own NGO Eagles 2030 and the National Ecological Center of Ukraine, which is our partner. Now, we have a long title here, so I'm going to read it out. So the title of the side event is Citizen-Driven Environmental Reporting in War and Conflict Zones, Leveraging Visual Data and AI for Crisis Management. And the focus of this event is going to be very much on the conflict in Ukraine, which we all see on our televisions every day. And it is not a very pleasant story, as you all know. So we are going to start. I'll just quickly, next slide, Sasha. So Eagles, for those of you who don't know us, we're an international NGO registered in Kenya, where I live, and accredited to the UN Environment Assembly. Next slide, Sasha. And this is our mission statement. So we work in the arena of data information and knowledge, and AI is very much part of all that. And it all fits under the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, where, again, there are many data gaps, severe data gaps. Next slide. So just to run through our speakers in roughly the correct order, I think. So we have two online speakers that I'll introduce in a moment. Victor Karamushka is a very well-known scientist in the Ukraine, working at the university in Kiev, and very much hands-on in terms of the actual physical damage to the environment caused by the conflict. And then his colleague, Dr. Elena Masalyukivska, she is on secondment to the University of Vaasa in Finland, and she will also look at the financial impact of this environmental damage, which is quite significant. And then the two online presenters will be followed by Lee Mallon, and then we have the three Esri presenters, Matthew Pennells, Patricia Cummins, and Sean Brer. So can we start with Victor? Let me introduce Victor, for those of you who don't know him. Victor, yes, there you are. Victor, welcome to our side event, and thank you for participating. Victor is Associate Professor and Head of Environmental Studies Department at the National University of Kiev in Ukraine. He has over 40 years of professional experience in academic research, mainly in environmental microbiology and biotechnology, environmental policy and management, ecosystems evolution, under anthropogenic impact and climate change. He's also worked in public service and international environmental cooperation programs. He obviously teaches and trains in the university and other formal settings. And he's also an environmental consultant, combined with expertise in EIA, which is Environmental Impact Assessment, SEA, which is Strategic Environmental Assessment, and Project Management. He is the author or co-author of more than 200 scientific and educational publications in the field of biocolloidal chemistry, environmental microbiology, environmental policy and management, ecosystems evolution. And since June of last year, 2022, he is leading the research team focused on the assessment of the environmental impact of the war in Ukraine. Victor's presentation is already on our screens. And without further ado, I'll hand the floor over to Victor, who is going to present on environmental impacts and risks caused by the war. Victor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jerry. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Good morning in Ukraine, because we still have morning. And I would like to present my team dedicated to environmental impact. Frankly speaking, I was promised to have 15 minutes, but you understand that this topic is so broad that it's not possible to cover. So my presentation will be rather general than specific. And I would like to start from very simple notice. This morning, when I woke up, Telegram channel Real Kyiv, has informed that 11 drone Shaheds were shot down over southern region of Ukraine, and 8 ballistic missiles were shot down over Kyiv. They were shot down, but debris from these rockets caused the destruction of houses. And every day, every morning starts with checking the news about military actions and threats. It's our life, it's my life. Military aggression of Russian Federation started in 2014, and since that, the housing sector, industrial facilities, life support infrastructure, agricultural lands and complexes, as well as the natural environment in Ukraine, were impacted by powerful military destruction in eastern Ukraine. However, the full-scale military invasion of Ukraine by Russian Federation, which began on February 24, 2022, was and still is especially devastating. And the result of this unprovoked war is the death of thousands of people, millions of displaced persons, destroyed residential infrastructure, ruined economy, and colossal destructions of the environment. On February 24, 2022, the troops of Russian Federation invaded the territory of Ukraine and for several weeks occupied some areas of Kyiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Mykolaiv region. Actually, it's north, eastern, and southern part of Ukraine. And intense hostilities as well as missile attacks on settlements and infrastructure facilities throughout the entire territory of Ukraine caused devastating and sometimes catastrophic consequences for the environment. The impact on the environment consists of the pollution and destruction of natural and human-made ecosystems, as well as include indirect consequences. And the scale, significance, and duration of the consequences of such an impact in many cases are detrimental to human and wildlife and considered as an ecocide. So the purpose of my presentation is to outline general environmental consequences and risks caused by the war in Ukraine. Since very beginning, the State Environmental Inspectorate, Ministry of Environmental Protection, General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine, as well as many national and international non-governmental organizations are involved in the registration of environmental violations and crimes and assessment of environmental damages and losses. And it caused very impressive picture. The territory and numerous objects of the military, residential, industrial, energy, and transport infrastructure were damaged or destroyed by hostilities, missile and artillery fire. And this picture demonstrates destructions of settlement on the left picture and disruption of industries on the right picture. And it says that Ukraine body is completely covered with terribly bleeding wounds. In general, environmental damages and consequences include pollution of the environment, destruction of the environment, namely landscapes, ecosystems, human-made objects and systems, and indirect impact on the environment. These damages and risk depend on the military impact factors and targeted objects, and these consequences can be grouped in the following categories. First one, I believe you understand me, atmospheric air pollution, because it happened every time and everywhere. Air pollution by volatile substances and dust particles, which are products formed as a result of ammunition explosion, products of oil product burning, combustions, products of other materials. And estimations of emissions is enormously huge. I wouldn't stop on the numbers, but you may find these numbers on the site of the Ministry of Environmental Protection. Another category of environmental damages relates to pollution of the environment by the products of the explosion of the ordnances, remnants of such ordnances, and destroyed military equipment, with most profound impact on the air, soil, and water. According to estimations of experts, I put some quotations from experts, from General NATO Secretary, from former Minister of Defense of Ukraine. So tens of thousands of shells are being used every day. And these shells had and have definitely direct impact on environments. Pollution of the environment by chemical substances as a result of shelling and destruction of industrial enterprises, energy infrastructure, and life support facilities has direct and indirect impact. As you may see on this picture, it depicts column density of nitrogen dioxygen over Ukraine for the peaceful period. And you see that most polluted area are located in eastern Ukraine. But after destruction industrial facilities in eastern Ukraine, pollution of nitrogen dioxide moved to another parts where hostilities are taking place. Another category of environmental impact and damages relate to formation of a significant amount of solid waste as a result of this destruction of residential infrastructure, as you may see on these pictures, or industrial, energy, and infrastructure facilities, as you may see on these pictures. Storage of such wastes cause ongoing pollution of land by corrosion products and other components. I would define as a special category environmental pollution after destruction of the oil infrastructure, like depots, oil products, warehouses, refineries, gas stations. On this picture, you may see intact depot in Chernihiv and Kyiv Oblast and destroyed depots. It caused one-time massive emission of combustion products. It caused soil pollution, and it caused possible penetration into surface and groundwater of oil product and product of burning. As an example, deterioration of Krechki oil depot, which is located in Kyiv Oblast, which happened in February and March 2022, caused emission over 400,000 tons of CO2 and other pollutants. Disruption and destructions of natural and anthropogenic landscapes are another type of environmental damages. And it's happened as a result of shelling facilities, operation of heavy military equipment, constructions of trenches and fortifications. And such activity caused soil pollution, destruction of land surface, destructions of vegetation. Fires in natural systems are one of the most spread consequences of military activities. And features of burned hotspot is destruction of vegetation, disruption of ground cover, remnants of burned trees, emission of combustion product. Regretfully, fires touched many protected areas as depicted on this slide, areas dedicated to Oleshki Sand National Park, Jarl Hatch National Park, and Biosphere Reserve Askania Nova. Regretfully, a lot of natural heritage lost during these fires. These fires were very typical in the spring in the northern Polysia region or north to Kyiv due to intense hostilities in this region. Large part of Ukraine remains contaminated by mines and explosive objects. And actually, this area covers approximately 30% of the entire territory of Ukraine. And regretfully, this area is still closed for investigations and economic use. One of the most impressive impacts on the environment and risk caused relates to impact on water resources. Most spread cases relates to direct and indirect water pollution results from military activities. But there are another types of impact on water resources, like destructions of wastewater facilities, which cause pollution of water bodies by specific organic substances. One of the most important impact relates to destructions of hydraulic facilities, which lead to flooding and the drainage of the territories. And as an example, I would like to mention two well-known cases. It's destructions of dam which help prevent flooding of Irpin River Valley by waters from Kyiv Reservoir. But destruction of this dam resulted in flooding huge area exceeding 2,800 hectares and length of more than 20 kilometers of Irpin River Valley. This area is still flooded. But the most impressive case, a well-known Kakhovka Dam blown up, which happened on June 6, 2023. Due to this powerful flow of water from Kakhovka Reservoir, a volume of this water is very significant, over reaching 18 cubic kilometers. So waters from reservoir rushing down to Dnieper River towards the Black Sea. I know that you are familiar with many reports and estimations of situation with Kakhovka Dam. That's why I will not discuss in details, but just would like to emphasize the most important consequences and risk. Because they are different for the territories located above and below the dam. But in any case, environmental damages are detrimental, multidimensional, and complex by nature. Just key of such consequences, ecological consequences and risk below the dam include large-scale inundations of the right and left banks, territories, and settlement, which cause loss of many human lives. We still don't know how many people died during this accident because main area flooded are located on the occupied territory. We know that this incident caused damages and destructions of residential and commercial and industrial buildings and structures. It caused heavy clogging and pollution of the aquatic environment, affecting the freshwater ecosystems of the Dnipro River and the marine ecosystem of the Black Sea. Because hotspots located in the flooded area, which comprised animal farms, latrines, sewage pits, car repair shops, etc., 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 were sources of pollution of this water. As regards to consequences and risk above the dam, the hydration of the reservoir has caused critical threats to the existence of rich freshwater biodiversity. And due to this, fishing as a sector of the local economy is actually being lost because spawning grounds destroyed and water volume lost. Recreational ecosystem services of the reservoir and its coastal areas have been lost for indefinite time period. Critical impact on the water intake for human and industrial needs make it impossible for entire area. And very important consequences is that irrigation of the significant agricultural areas in Dnipro, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions were lost. Now we just can, in distance, monitor situation on the bed of Kakhovka reservoir, and the ecological consequences caused by the destruction of Kakhovka Dam for the territories located above the dam lead to successions of new wetland ecosystems. On these pictures, we see situation in the months after blowing up of the dam. And you may see that this area remain as look like desert. But in the months after that, we see intensive vegetation. And these vegetations are covering almost entire territory of Kakhovka bed. This and many other consequences lead me to conclusions that the main environmental challenge in Ukraine is to overcome the consequences of the war and restore a natural and anthropogenic environment to an ecologically acceptable states. And what we are doing now, we try to make inventory of damages. We try to make environmental state assessment of damages areas. We introduce monitoring of pollution dynamics of damaged areas. We try to make assessment of damages and develop remediation or rehabilitation program for such areas. And next steps is remediation program and projects implementations. Everything with accompanying with collecting evidences of military actions impact on environments. And regretfully, however, today, December 11 is 656th day of the Russian military invasion of Ukraine. And regretfully, the war continues. People die. The economy is collapsing. The environment is destroying. But we believe that peace will be very soon achieved. We believe in positive changes ahead. Thanks for your attention. Jerry?
Yeah, hold on. Microphone was dead. Victor, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I hear you.
Yeah, sorry. The mic I was using has died. Victor, thank you for your presentation. I won't go into questions just yet. I mean, it's very hard for me to even say anything after seeing that. I mean, it's just catastrophic. Victor, just stay on the line. We're going to move on to Elena, and then when Elena is finished, I'll take questions from the floor here.
Okay.
Now, Sasha, you need to get Elena. Okay, Victor, now we can see you. Thank you again, Victor. Just stay where you are, and let me move on to Elena. Now, I just need to introduce Elena. So Elena Masalyukivska is a visiting researcher at the University of Vasa in Finland, on secondment from the National University of Kiev, Ukraine, where she is associate professor at the Department of Environmental Studies. Now, in her current location at the University of Vasa, she is researching policy instrument mixes to accelerate energy transition and circular economy in Finland at the national, regional, and municipal levels. an environmental and ecological economist by training. She works at the intersection of environmental economics and public policy, and her areas of expertise include environmental policy instrument mixes, environmental and carbon taxation, green sustainable public procurement. Olena has over 20 years of professional experience in research and policy analysis related to environment and sustainability, and 14 years executing consultancy projects commissioned by international organizations in Ukraine and outside Ukraine. And she has 11 years of management experience in donor-funded projects. And Olena, welcome. And we look forward to your presentation, which will focus on the cost of what we have just seen in Victor's presentation. The floor is yours, Olena.
Thank you, Jerry. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. And of course, every Ukrainian these days is using every opportunity to draw attention to the consequences of the military aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine. And of course, we all looking forward how to document, assess, and evaluate these consequences. And using this high tribune, I really would like to focus on two things. First, the need for the post-war environment in Ukraine, and secondly, on the monetary evaluation of this of the damage cost. Why the assessment is needed? First of all, in order to guide the reconstruction of Ukraine in the way to meet the environmental goals and targets and do not create additional environmental burdens. We also understand that we need information and data to provide inputs on relevant regional and global processes, ensuring that the environmental policy community are aware of the most critical lessons learned and emerging issues. Thirdly, we understand that we need to prioritize emerging environmental issues, including transboundary ones. For instance, what's the consequences of the Kakhovka Dam destruction and on other countries on the Black Sea, and what are the consequences of the climate change? Fourthly, we awareness of environmental goals and make them and ways to achieve them in target audiences and general public. And finally, we do want to inform long-lasting impacts on making investment decisions by donor country governments and multilateral funding institutions. So we need, first of all, to understand what is going on. Dr. Karamushka has just introduced a snapshot of various changes. But then if we ask, well, what is the volume of pollution? What are the concentrations? What are the long-term effects? Many organizations, like especially local research institutes, think tanks, NGOs, are making efforts to document, record, and then assess. But Ukraine doesn't have enough capacity. Even the Ukrainian Environmental Inspectorate pushes all the limits trying to monitor the consequences, but still on the scale of invasion is so huge that definitely more effort needs to be done, and also on the more comprehensive level. And the idea that is currently being circulated and proposed by the National Environmental Center of Ukraine, the core organizer of this event, is basically to follow the well-established United Nations Environmental Program process called Global Environmental Outlook that allows to comprehensively assess the state of the environment globally, and also develop the policy recommendations to change the current destructive trend. So, and modeling that, we propose that there need to be this five-stage kind of approach. The concept you see on the screen. First, we need to identify state and trends of the post-war environment in relation to meeting goals and targets. We need to identify, evaluate gaps in realizing these goals and targets. We need to analyze available policy responses and then evaluate policy and measures that could potentially help speed up meeting these goals and targets at the local and sectoral levels. Then we need to identify opportunities for the response and, of course, estimate costs of action and inaction. And when Jerry introduced me, and he said that I would speak about the financial consequences. The thing is that if I throw at you many numbers, they will not say much to you, but it's like billions of US dollars, if not trillions. But the question is whether you will believe me or those organizations who evaluated or assessed or provided this number. And if you would like to know these numbers, I'm sure that Ukrainian delegation, which has been presented in Dubai, headed by the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources of Ukraine, Mr. Ruslan Strelets, they actually have been presenting this data fully. And I will rely on their data if I would present to them. What I want to show to you is that before we go to the monetary assessment of these damages, we need to go through these stages. Because if you don't, then this data might not be inclusive, might not be reliable, they might not include sustainable solutions. So the objective of this post-war Ukrainian assessment for Ukraine should be, first of all, to provide a comprehensive and credible environmental assessment to support decision-making processes at all levels. Secondly, engage all relevant stakeholders. Thirdly, strengthen the policy relevance of this assessment by including an analysis of appropriate policy options and their indicative costs and benefits. For instance, there is a debate in Ukraine. Do we need to rebuild Kakhovka Dam hydroelectric Kakhovka Dam? So if I would be present there, I would ask you, who does believe that we need to rebuild the dam? And then I would ask who believes that we shouldn't rebuild the dam and, let the nature take over. But the correct answer would be, well, we need assessments, we need data, we need modeling, we need scenarios, and we need costs associated with each policy alternative. So then the objective of the study also should be to inform planning and strategy development activities of relevant national and regional institutions, and of course, inform international processes and meetings where post-war strategies, plans, activities, and implementation mechanism will be discussed. This is a very, very important process, very important assessment, which essentially will build on, first of all, on the national report on the state of environment of Ukraine, also benefits from the outcomes and lessons of the studies which are currently being conducted. And many, I'm sure, the presenters that follow our kind of session actually are working on that. And also analyze trends in driving forces, pressures, state impacts and responses. And of course, evaluating changes in ecosystem services where feasible. So we see this report as having like three parts on the indicator-based analysis of the state and trends of the environment, policy analysis, and opportunities for action. So following the model of the UNEP Global Environmental Outlook, there should be steering committee, expert advisory board, environmental assembly expert group, which comprised of reputable national and international practitioners, data and indicators group, and some secretary. I will not stop here. If you would be interested to know, we're ready to discuss. But now the second part, this is where Dr. Karamushka and our team at the environmental department Academy are working on estimating costs of damages to the environment. And so just to inform you, Ukrainian government as early as in March 2022, which is less than a month after the full-scale invasion, they basically approved this resolution on the procedure for determining damages and losses costs to Ukraine as a result of the armed of the Russian Federation. And these methodologies, basically, this methodology became a foundation for other like 11 resolutions of line ministries, which basically approved this approach how to assess damages. But what is important to understand that this current methodology accounts only for the market value of the losses, like number of trees, number of animals, just multiplied by the some market or state given value. And these methodologies totally don't include in ecosystem services such as climate regulation, such as protection from the land erosion and things like that. And these methodologies are already quite well developed internationally. So what we call for is really to use a more comprehensive approach. For instance, the World Bank approach to assess losses from the natural disasters, which essentially has like 4 components. So first, direct costs include marketable costs and non-marketable costs. So because current methodologies approved, they include only these direct marketable costs. And non-marketable, such as health, death, loss of ecosystems, and this is what we are focusing on in the department, then they are not being included now, although the ministry understand that, and there is a working group which is working on kind of incorporating and developing methodology for the ecosystem ecosystem services assessment. Then, of course, there are indirect costs, which is also comprised of marketable and non-marketable costs. I really don't want to go into details with the methodologies, how to do that, but the current research literature, quite a few of these cases, methodology is pretty well tested. So, and this is something that we need to include in Ukraine, but of course we need support in terms of the capacity and in terms of the cooperation with international organization and research institutions. So yes, essentially the final costs should be a sum of these 4 components, both direct and indirect, marketable and marketable and not marketable losses. So just to conclude, an open stage for the discussion. So Russian military aggression caused unprecedented impact on the war, on human well-being and human environment. And in order to assess that, there is a need to initiate and the environmental assessments in Ukraine, following UNEP geo-methodology and approach. And finally, a comprehensive evaluation of the war-related damages, including monetary evaluation of the ecosystem services, should be conducted also on the very, very detailed level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena. Trying to get your head around all these costs is mind-blowing, I think, isn't it? To say
I
the very
try
least.
to be as not technical as possible, believe me.
That's okay. But I mean, it is just a mind-blowing exercise to put a cost on this damage. I mean, my own gut reaction, just going back to what Victor presented, it's so important on a day-by-day or whatever is practical basis to keep logging the damage. At least you're building up some kind of inventory that you can refer back to later. I think this is really important, Victor, in what you presented. So I'm going to open the floor to questions for both of you. So stay online. First question is from Lee Mallon, who's an AI developer, an expert.
Hi, actually, the question is to both of you. Amazing presentations. Is getting access to this data during and the immediate days of the conflict obviously is highly difficult. Do you think that would have or can assist in understanding the burden financially in the long term? Because otherwise you have to wait until the conflict either ends or unfortunately becomes a part of everyday life to understand the sheer financial repercussions. And then to Victor, from an environmental damage point of view, obviously being the environmental agency, you've probably had access to more information than the outside world with regards to the environmental damage. Were you able to track this from the day one of the invasion, or have you had to kind of work alongside the understandable humanitarian kind of actions that may have slowed you down on monitoring the environmental effects?
Victor, could you start?
Yes.
If I understand.
Does Victor want to respond first and then Olena? Your question was directed to both. Yeah. So who wants to go first, Victor or Olena?
If I understood correctly.
Victor, okay, we'll take you first.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, if I understood correctly, the questions relates to accessibility of data on damages and registration, assessment, and so on. And regretfully, we don't have direct access to most of damages area. And even in this area, even in the case if this area allocated on the territory which already deoccupied or on the peaceful territory of Ukraine, there is a still risk of to find unexploded ordnances on something like this. And actually this area are closed. So mainly we use distance methods for estimations, but apart of this, we understand that this is a process. Situation is changing drastically every day, especially in the area of military conflict in front area, like line which lie on the Dnipro River. So definitely we need assistance, technical assistance and resources from outside for registration damages and for making assessment, environmental assessment and economic assessment. Olena, please clarify.
Yes, just in support to what Victor said. Of course, currently the Environmental Inspectorate of Ukraine is documenting and collecting. Yes, probably you've heard about citizens kind of core collection, core monitoring. There is a number of apps that basically allows every citizen to record if there is a damage of the environment. So that data exists, but of course it's limited. So there is a group of experts who are working on that, analyzing, processing, documenting. But this data is not, of course, widely available, and that's understandable. Of course, there are quite a few organizations that include satellite imagery trying to basically assess the consequences. And I think this is very important to take into account what Victor just said, that, you know, it's dangerous to go into some parts of the territories. Like 30% of Ukraine is currently being is mined, so you cannot go there. But I think that everything needs to be lined up really for the post-war assessment, because only then we can start really pulling together this data, trying to have access to territories, and then also this data, I think it still pretty much will be protected. So that's why we are proposing to have this kind of group of people who will have access to this research, who will put together all this available data that is being collected, and also that will be collected later. So this is like, currently we cannot have the entire picture. We just can't for this number of reasons. And in terms of monetary, currently we can focus only on developing methodologies and approaches how to do that. So it's not just market values, you know, like the value of the tree which is cut down, but this tree, you know, generated oxygen, you know, absorbs CO2. So this is not currently not currently of the methodology adopted by the Ministry of Environment. So we can work on the methodologies, but then when the data is ready, then we can assess. And most importantly, it's not only data, it's data. Then we need forecasts how current environmental changes will be realized in the long term, in the long term. Then we need to understand what are the direct and indirect damage, and only after that we can do monitor evaluation. Monitor evaluation is a difficult part, but it comes the last one. First, we really need to collect data, and actually what I call for, and people who are gathered here, you're working with GIS, you are working with artificial intelligence, so you are those who can actually help and create the foundation for collecting and analyzing this data. Monitor evaluation will be built on what you will have.
Thank you, Victor and Olena. Are
May
there
I
any
have-
more questions?
May I have
Oh,
one
sorry.
more?
Yeah,
That-
sorry, Victor.
I have one more small comment. Since very
Yes.
beginning, the National Environmental Inspectorate recorded all damages and published reports on these records. But it stopped since July 2022. Everything was closed and data now are not available. But Inspectorate is still making records of all damages. Why it's happened? On one hand, we understand that it's necessary to understand what kind of resources do we need to rehabilitate, to renovate territories. But on another hand, publishing this information, we give information for our enemy to make assessment of the state of national economy. And it's danger for our countries. That's why this information mainly closed. And that's why international and national non-governmental organizations are using different sources of information, like publications in mass media and something like this. But this information, of course, are very restricted and not exactly presented.
Thank you, Victor. And I know one small thing I'd like to say, based on information I've heard from one of my own sources in Ukraine, that the government entities like ministries and institutions around that have also lost a lot of personnel because they've had to join the armed forces. And that then weakens these institutions to a level that, well, it would be just dysfunctional in many countries to lose so many staff. Any other questions? Our ESRI contingent? You're just, I know, you're still digesting it all, Pat. This is Pat Cummins from ESRI. I think you all know ESRI in Redlands, California.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on Oriana's comment there about the kind of the compounded loss. I think this week at COP, we talk a lot about the compounded benefits of taking actions toward positive change with climate. Like you plant the tree and you're going to get shade for cooling and it's going to absorb carbon and it's going to do all these ecosystem services at the same time. And in your unique situation, your awful situation there, we really have to think about the compounded losses of the damage that's being done. So I think it's really kind of a flip of the conversation that we're having here for the situation you're experiencing there. And I think it's just such a challenge to collect the data in this, in an area you can't go to easily, but build that collection of data to be used and analyzed as we go forward. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Pat. Now we have a number of people online. Can I ask if there's anybody who's online would like to make a comment, ask a question of our two presenters? Speak now or forever hold your silence. Nobody? Okay, I don't see any hands. Okay, last call. Okay, Victor and Olena, it is difficult for for anybody in the room here to comment in a substantive way on what we've just seen presented. We all obviously hope that this conflict ends sooner rather than later, and that we can start the important work of this post-conflict assessment, which in itself is going to be a monumental task to undertake and to deliver. In the meantime, we thank you, especially you, Victor, who you're on the ground there and you're seeing it on a daily basis, all this terrible damage. The fact that it's been logged and inventoried is a very important task, and we wish you well in keeping that effort going and sustaining it for however long it takes. And Olena, let me thank you as well for presenting on the post-conflict assessment. I was involved last year with the concept paper for that, and we hope that this gets off the ground and gets suitably funded as well, because it will need funding to conduct that assessment. So a big thank you to both of you for your excellent presentations. And stay with us, because we have other presenters. And next, it is my pleasure to once again introduce Lee Mallon. Lee is the Chief Technology Officer at Humanity, leveraging artificial intelligence to promote climate action and inspire a vision for the future. He also collaborates with the financial regulation team at Abu Dhabi Global Markets, developing AI tools for enhanced supervision of financial firms. And additionally, Lee is the author of DKR, Humanistic AI is Here. And Lee is now going to give his presentation on the role of citizen science in war and conflict zones. Over to you, Lee.
Thank you, Jerry. So as Jerry kind of nicely introduced me there, I just want to say I've been an engineer in technology for the last 20 years. I have massive passion on artificial intelligence data, but particularly on storytelling and how we can use artificial intelligence to tell a stronger story. I wanted to kind of zoom out slightly around citizen science. For those who aren't familiar, citizen science across the globe has taken a massive uptake over the last decade because there is a diminishing trust in what companies may or may not report, and people on the ground want to basically validate the findings themselves. Like, this is an article from The Guardian that came out a few weeks ago from the UK, where Thames Water is basically discharging sewage into the river. But the problem here is that the water firms in the UK don't have any legal obligation to report how much sewage they put into the waterways. They just have to record how many hours they do it for. So again, you get a lack of data transparency. So what ends up happening is you get my co-founder in Humanity, Dave Wallace, people like Dave who go to rivers and they take samples of the water and they basically report them and they document them, similar to how Victor said they've been doing in Ukraine, to log and to document this environmental damage. But the problem is these citizen scientists, they're not technologists. They are passionate people looking to protect the environment. And therefore, when they log this very valuable data, the data sometimes gets lost because it doesn't tell an interesting and engaging story, because it looks a lot like this. But with artificial intelligence, we can make data much more engaging. And obviously, there isn't anything more engaging than some of the unfortunate photos that both Victor and Ola shared with us. But we can turn things like, for example, the Thames River data into something more like this, where you have the iconic Big Ben and House of Parliament. And this creates a much more ephemeral reaction than just looking at raw data. Applying the same type of things around, say, something like sea level rises, this would be what downtown Dubai would look like with the iconic Burj Khalifa in the background if sea levels rise by X meters. But when you're in a war and a conflict zone, citizen science tends to get left behind, understandably, because you're too busy protecting yourself, protecting your family and your community. So we wondered, like, what is the thing that then kind of gets affected by this? You have infrastructure that gets destroyed, but nature is the thing that largely gets left behind until the conflict is over. And as we heard from Victor, and I'm sure you'll hear in the next presentation, we tend to then use things like drone footage and satellite imagery. But again, as Victor said, we can't release satellite imagery until long past the conflict because of the military sensitivity to it. And drones, however, they've been a great source of ecological monitoring because they've now become a combative force. They are also being shot down, even if they're being used for monitoring purposes. So we wanted to do a bit of a research project and ask if you can make social media a citizen scientist. So we did this project. Now, all the images I'm about to show you are actually AI generated for licensing reasons, but I'll loop back around to a hopeful solution to that at the end. But our thought was, can we scour social media in conflict zones and pull the images that have been shared and the GPS positions, and then can we use them as a source of documenting the natural decay and destruction through images in the background? So what we would do is we'd basically go on social media, we'd search for conflicts, and especially the GPS positions, and we'd look for images like this, where you have obviously a person in the image, but you actually have quite a lot of nature around. And then we would take that image, we'd run it through an AI model where we would basically create a segmentation analysis. So that basically breaks this image up into 50 to 100 pieces. And as you can see, it identifies things like this lady's shoes, her bag, buildings, but also the different matters of nature. And then we would take each of these micro images and we'd run them through another algorithm that says, is this nature or is this something else? And that would leave us with an image which is just of things relating to nature. So very easily-ish, we could take what on the left is a social media photo and turn it into a point-in-time representation of how nature looked on a certain day. And then we could map this over time. And as you can see along the bottom, the slow decay of that green field in that environment. Now, this example is all from the same vantage point, but actually using compass direction and some points of reference, we could actually take images from the same location, even from different perspectives, and get the same level of insight. We then wanted to zoom back out, and then can you pull this from thousands of images from across the same GPS positions? Can you then map them onto the city? So you start to get that visibility of areas that have been identified and places that need to be documented. And it's great to hear that in Ukraine, there are applications to help citizen scientists to do this in obviously safe areas. But one of the big things is in the research that we did was I couldn't show you in this demo any of the photos we tried with because social media doesn't give you permission to use these images for anything other than for looking them and scrolling on your phone. So we want to kind of advocate for a hashtag called F4R, which is basically saying if you post an image on social media during a conflict, during an area where you want to document the environmental damage, if you use this hashtag, you're basically saying this image is free for research and there'll be no legal ramifications if you use it for that. And from doing this, our own outcomes, then I think if we can do more, we can find a way to get these images in a legal licensed way, is we can provide a lot of different data sets. We can provide data sets for environmental agencies like Victor's entity. We can also use them for tracking just general decay of nature. There is this future urban planning that will happen at some point in Ukraine where you want to understand, can this area still be used for crops in 10 years because it decayed over 4 months and this was the effects, and we can cross-reference this with, we know that there was 8 missile blasts in the time, so we can start to assume what the chemical composition of the ground may or may not be. But for me, the biggest thing is if we have all this information from either citizen scientists collecting actual data safely, or if we're using social media to scrape all this information across whatever means we can then turn this data into really engaging data-driven storytelling opportunities, be it a interactive map of a river was showing the decay over time, be it a AI-generated storybook that can explain to children the importance of environmental protection, and the list goes on. And I think if we can start to collate this data and we can also show people the importance of both documenting this stuff actively, but also showing technologists how you can grab data from passive things, as things as simple as social media imagery. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lee. Citizen science, there's so many people out there with goodwill, which should be harnessed. And I think one of the best examples I came across of citizen science was the earthquake in Nepal, which was, I think, 2015. Yeah, I think it was 2015. Because of the damage to communications infrastructure, the Nepalese government had no idea whatsoever of the extent of the damage until people took out their mobile phones and started showing where the problem areas were. It was a classic example, and it happened in a matter of days. And of course, it needed to happen quickly. So I am a firm believer in the role of citizen science. In terms of Ukraine, of course, there are challenges because you can't walk everywhere and anywhere because of the landmine situation. Lee, thank you for your presentation. Can I ask for any questions on what you've seen from Lee? Matthew Pennells from Esri.
I guess we discussed it earlier, Lee, but for the benefit of the audience, where do you see this going next and scaling up? And you mentioned about the sort of hashtags there, but what could help this move forward and where next?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is the source data. The one thing that we are from this research project we found is actually the tools and services for citizen scientists in general is quite lacking. So it was originally in my presentation, but I kind of took it out, which is actually we're working on a very accessible mobile app that basically will take pictures, store all the GPS positions, compass data, and then you can send that up to an open, you're basically agreeing to an open license for any imagery off the back of it. It's not ideal because realistically social media is where people are going to drop this stuff. But at least it's a step two that anyone in any conflict area around the world could use, and also set up the remote store of it. It's completely open source. So.
Anybody online have a question for Lee? I see no hands up in the audience. Anybody want to ask a question on what you've seen presented from Lee Mallon?
I have a question, if I may.
Who's that? Olena?
Oh, this is Olena. Yes.
Oh yes, Olena. Yes, I see you. Go ahead, Olena.
Yeah. Yes, I wanted to ask if there any particular standards for the citizen science and whether there is kind of a movement to develop a methodology so that when citizens, environmental damages, then it's kind of on the comprehensive, some methodological basis. Because, I have kind of sometimes doubts that if a person takes a picture of, of a fire, of the oil base, that it will count as something that could be later used for either prosecution or for reports. Could you inform if there are such kind of trends in developing this citizen science methodology so they are kind of widely available, through our networks of organizations who are doing the monitoring? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So from the point of view of just so we've been looking at it more from like data schema point of view. So actually, if you, how do you basically annotate the data in a unified way? I'm not fully aware of anything from a citizen science point of view. I wonder if the ESRI guys are aware of anything that may be able to chime in on this.
I was going to say, you're setting me up nicely for one section of my presentation coming up where a partner organization has done some of that kind of standard setting to standardize some of the inputs coming in. I'll share it in a few minutes.
Thank you, Pat. I can offer one small contribution here. Depending on how professional the citizen scientists are, let's pick a hobby like collecting seashells. If you collect a seashell, you have to record, you know, where the tide was and what time of the year, etc. So there is some metadata around seashells, and also, of course, the bird watchers. You know, they're now recording what the bird sounds like and all of that. So if it's very quasi-professional citizen science, there are standards there. For the ordinary person with a mobile phone, I would say it's pretty random. In other words, standards would be absent largely. Now, are there any other questions for Lee before I move on to our final cohort of presenters? Anybody else have a question for Lee? No? Thank you for your question, Olena. Please stay on the line as we move to our final set of presenters who are representing ESRI. As you know, ESRI is a technology company building the leading mapping and spatial analytics tools. And their presentation will explore how citizen sensors are contributing to reporting on environment in conflict scenarios. And our speakers are not necessarily in the order of presenting, but I'll read them out. We have Pat Cummins, who at ESRI is Government Strategy and Policy Solutions Director. And Sean Breyer is Director of ESRI's Living Atlas. And finally, Matthew Pennells is the ESRI Global Community Engagement Manager. So I'm just handing over, I think Pat is going to start first. And just bear with us for a moment while we get
We'll swap
the
out Regine
technology
here.
working for Pat.
Thank you. Thank you very much for
Floor
that
is yours,
introduction
Pat.
and the invitation to participate in these important sessions. All right. And I will be teaming up with my colleagues today. We'll keep it lively. I'm going to start out with a little context setting, kind of show a little bit of kind of ESRI, our approach to climate change, to actually looking at all kinds of issues in a from a geographic context. I'll get into a little bit on the citizens as sensors. And then Sean's going to dazzle us with some demonstrations. We'll share a few other things, and then Matt will wrap things up for us. So just to get started and to, I think it very much complements what was talked about. Okay, I'm not getting the slides to advance. Oh, now it went. I've been doing it on there, but okay. Okay. All right. Now we're moving. I mean, we are at COP. It's been a week plus of amazing conversations, both about the challenges we're facing and some optimism about where we can go. When we put our minds together, we take all of our different perspectives, our expertise, our data, our knowledge. How do we bring this together to not just look at the challenges we're facing, but also what kind of tools do we have that we can work together to create the world that we do want to see? And part of that, as Leo's been talking about today, is how do we simplify this? How do we communicate this in a much more effective way to get people to understand what it is that we're passionate about? And this is one visual example we've been working on here to show how we're out of balance with nature. This is trying to simplify information down to, okay, in the green areas on this map, this is where we have carbon, kind of a good situation where trees are sequestering carbon, our croplands are peatlands, and then the red where it is where we have carbon emitters. And how do we improve that balance to turn this more green from red? But that's the kind of thing I think we need to do to visualize, to communicate to people what the situation is, and that we really do need to take action. So everybody can play their part to create that world that we do want to see, whether we're looking at it from the perspective of the economic impacts or from the nature-based solutions impact. How do we create a world that is in balance with nature? And what I want to talk, the way that Esri, we're a GIS software company. We really focus on kind of geography as an underpinning, the foundation of our understanding of our world. So how do we use that geographic approach, a geographic perspective, to bring different kinds of data together, whether we're talking about climate, whether we're talking about kind of conflict zones and the competing activities there. Here we're looking at how do we take economic data together to merge it together with social data, demographic data. Where are people now? Where are people moving to? And then layer on top of that the environmental data. This, using geography as our foundation, it allows us to bring lots of different kinds of data together so we can gain an understanding. So we have that common language to go forward and to start to evaluate opportunities and actions. And this geography gives us this geographic approach where we can take a science-based, data-based approach from lots of different disciplines, bring it together in a collaborative fashion to give us that comprehensive view, take a holistic look at things, not just from our stovepipe, where your expertise, deep knowledge there, but you may not know as much about the economist's view of something. But this geographic approach gives us that foundation to gain a common understanding and take positive action, plan our positive actions going forward. And all in a kind of a documented scientific, science data-based approach. And this technology that Esri creates, the GIS software, this is the platform that allows us to apply that geographic approach. If you think about geography as a foundation, a geographic approach is a way to organize your thinking. The GIS allows you to implement that thinking in a very kind of structured way. And the GIS allows you to create that understanding and go through this process. We often, in any problem-solving situation, you start with data collection. You move on to, in this sense, in GIS, we then move on to visualizing and mapping that data. And then doing your analysis. What does it mean? What is the data telling us? And what are the opportunities we can find in the data to make decisions, to do our planning, to take the right actions in the right places with the right people? And then inform our decision makers so we can actually turn it from that information and knowledge into action to get to the outputs, the impacts that we all want. So we get to that action part and we kind of create that cycle. We continually circle back to that taking action part and revisit as we go. But it can be it can be a very inclusive process. Depending on your organization, you may be an expert in the mapping and visualization part, and you only work in that part of the sequence, or you're a data expert and you work on that, or you're in a small organization and you're doing the whole process yourself, using the GIS as your platform for doing the evaluation, making the decisions, and tracking your progress along the way. And at Esri, we've been doing this for quite a long time. Our company is over 50 years old, and environment, climate, sustainability, all of these concepts have been a part of our company from the beginning. The ESRI is actually originally stood for Environmental Systems Research Institute. So environment is core to our company and something that we have been working on for decades. I'm glad we have this slide in here because I think it goes back to what Oleana and Victor were talking about earlier. One of the real strengths of GIS and this geographic approach, our software in particular here, it allows us to take, it allows anybody to take data from all different sources and bring them together in an organized way. So whether you're taking those photos and you're taking them to a location, or you're using remotely sensed data, or you have other in situ sensors taking air quality samples or the water quality samples that Lee's friend was taking, it allows you to bring all of that together in a uniform database so you can share the information, collect it in together and move it into that decision-making process. So it kind of goes from the beginning of the workflow to the end to the decision-making. And a couple of examples, since we're talking in this session more about kind of the public engagement, citizen engagement, I wanted to show a few, and a lot of, I should say, a lot of what we can do in a conflict zone, we learn from a non-conflict zone, right? So we want to take the lessons learned just in regular society. In the bottom left here, we have crowdsourcing for flood damage. This was a flood situation in Florida where they're using an application to gather information, what are citizens observing, and put it into a web-based map so everybody could see where the flooding was happening. We have other situations with real-time reporting on where I live, where snowplows are, right? Can I actually drive to this location because the plow has actually been out there and cleared the way? So we have a lot of different sample applications here. I will dig into a couple that I think really speak to what we're talking about here. And we build these common tools that are then configurable. We build the basic capabilities and then allow you to tailor it to that situation. So like the one on the right-hand side, this quick capture, I'll show you an example in a minute, but this is something that's intended to just be like, you're out in the field, you have big buttons on your phone, you say, it's this kind of a situation. I take a photo, maybe answer one other thing, and you're done. In this survey 123, this is also another configurable application designed for field collection, but you can define the parameters. You might have a series of 10 questions on there, and it's got the pick list. So you say, yes, this is a flood situation. I'm in, I don't know, whatever the questions are, you can define the answers. So you start to standardize the data coming in, control some of the quality of that data coming in. Getting back to, I think it was Oleana's question earlier. There are ways to kind of box it in to standardize it. So we put some structure around the data that is coming in there. And I'll show you an example here. This is the one I was referring to. There's an organization, NAPSG Foundation, that's a National Association of Public Safety GIS Professionals. So GIS folks in the public safety realm, and they have an organization that wanted to do just that. They said, we have all these different kinds of disasters. We have people out there that want to help. We have people that want to get that data in very quickly, but we want to do it in a reliable way. So what's that incremental step? So they use that quick capture concept, and the one here along the up here. It's the floaty mouse. Anyway, in here where they have different categories, whether it's a tornado, it's a flood, it's whatever the disaster is and whatever the kind of the thing you're looking at, they have different categories. So you just click the buttons, and then it's also a kind of a rating here, building kind of the building damage score. Is it minimally damaged? Is it maximum? Is it in between? So they have these kind of standard forms. You can click on that, take your picture, it automatically shows up on the map, and you get some kind of organized information, which then can also go right into a dashboard. I don't know if I have a dashboard in the next example. So somebody on the other end can be managing the incident. They can say, oh, we've had all these photos come in. Most of them are for trees down on power lines, or it's this kind of structure damage, and it's more severe in one area than another. So there's ways to kind of control that information coming in. Another example that can, I think, translate where it's safe in a conflict zone. This is just even during a disaster, after a disaster, knowing what businesses are open and which businesses are closed. There are different ways to capture that information, but citizens can also, just like a simple business open, business closed, comes in through your phone, comes into that common database where you can pull data from lots of different sources, and then you can share it out to the community in a simple to view map. And it's constantly being updated and changing. Now I want to shift gears a little bit as we're kind of merging kind of climate, environment, and conflict. We've been looking at that for a number of years in different situations, and our Story Maps team a few years ago was looking at, okay, what are some of the impacts of climate? We often think about it as just in the numbers of, you know, more extreme storms and higher temperatures and things that are often commonly talked about. But we're saying, okay, what are the longer term, kind of the bigger impacts of this? That climate change is, or there are a lot of different stressors that are having major impacts on societies, on countries. And so they took a look at this concept of climate migrants. I think Sean might dive into this one a little bit longer or a little bit later. But this is a story map that breaks it into categories about climate migrants created by creating instability in communities due to sea level rise or extreme heat, water rising, or just climate and conflict. And it's amazing when you take that broad view, what those impacts are. Some of the, I should say that in this too, in this climate and conflict area, we also think about, as climate is having an impact, we're having more droughts, it's having impacts on things like food insecurity that cause instability, cause whole communities, societies to have to move to follow the food. And we can use a lot of this data and analytics to dive into that and start to anticipate where these conflicts, where these stresses are going to exacerbate a situation and cause further problems. I think Sean will share some work we're doing with another group that's really looking at kind of environment and law enforcement and environment and the impacts of climate. But with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Sean to pick up on that thread on food insecurity, climate caused food insecurity.
Thank you, Pat. So what I want to shortly do is go through a few different ways that we've been looking at these things, like the threat of change over time. In this case, we're looking at global food security. Earlier today, we looked at some examples of some work going on to try to project the future of different climate and the effects of food security. We did that at a local level in the US. Here, we're showing you a story map, and we'll share this link at the end. This story map actually looks at different topics. Here, this is showing the current map of global wheat extent across the entire world. We can also look at areas where we know there's a lot of wheat production. Obviously, Ukraine is one of the key wheat producing areas of Europe, and it's in the middle of this conflict. There's a lot of potential problems. But we can look at this in a satellite view. So here at the top is a picture of what a normal crop condition looks like in Ukraine. And here's what we're seeing now in the crop areas. So many of the areas are not being used and the crops are not coming out. So this is a risk, and we can capture that within remote sensing. But what's the long-term effect of that? Here is an example of what the map looks like when we talk about wheat suitability. So this was done in 2020. The areas in green here are the most productive areas in the world for wheat. And what we did is we used some of the AI approaches and this geospatial approach to do some future analysis. And just by doing an analysis of just wheat, we can now look at a map and see what 2050 will look like based on the current climate conditions and how they're changing today. Now, it's hard to tell the difference between those right now, but what we can do is put this in a map view with a graph, and you'll see the area in gold here on the right shows the current amount of yield and where it is latitudinally across the world. And the red is actually where we're going to see that projection shift to the north over the next 25 years. You can see the same in the southern part of the world, but it's a little slighter shift. What does that look like? Here's an example of what Asia will look like. This is the present map, and then it should move forward and show us that projection into 2050. The same can be seen if we look forward to Europe. So again, let's look at Ukraine over here, and you can see very quickly the map starts to show you that migration north, and a lot of the main crop areas for Ukraine today for wheat are going to move into that central region, even into the Russian boundaries. So these are all things we need to look at and keep track of as we're thinking about food security in areas where war might break out. Another area that Pat mentioned was the International Initiative for Law Enforcement for Climate. So this group started about a year ago, actually, at COP, and their first official meeting was just a few days ago. And their focus is really on, there's a lot of law enforcement work that relates to climate already today. You may not think of it that way. We think about them writing tickets for our speeding and things like that. But we also have a lot of information and collection of issues around social, economic, security, and then environmental crimes. Let me move down a little bit here just to show you some examples. So here's a great example of I didn't know this when I first started the story, is the environmental crime of the world. The third most lucrative area of business is around drug counterfeiting and goods, but almost $100 to $250 billion of annual revenue is actually going towards poaching. So these are some of the stories that they've got to tell. There's also a lot of environmental work, people going into the forest, stealing, cutting down wood, and then taking it off site and tracking it. It's turned into its actually own small financial market. So there's been a lot of work going on in this area with the law enforcement to try to understand that financial flow within that, but also to try to break the cycle and stop the destruction of the plants and trees here. So the story continues on, and we'll share this at the end, but I wanted to switch back over to a video. So as we were talking today and going through it, one of the things we wanted to share, and it's a little bit of a longer video, so I'm sorry we don't usually do that. But I think this is going to be a really interesting, because it's the U.S. State Department, Esri, the Ukraine government, and Yale trying to collect with citizens information, crimes on humanity that are going on inside of the Ukraine, and creating the database that we've been talking about in the background. So I'm going to turn this on just a second.
One year ago, the world watched the buildup of Russia's military forces along Ukraine's borders. We saw the growing presence of Russia's troops and equipment moving towards the border, presenting a clear threat to Ukraine. Almost a year ago today, on the weekend of February 12th, the State Department's...
Oh, sorry about that.
threat to Ukraine. Almost a year ago today, on the weekend of February 12th, the State Department's Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations gathered a group of conflict analysts and Ukraine experts to discuss what could be done. This gathering aligned with CSO's mission, which is to look ahead and anticipate what might happen and devise strategies so that we can respond quickly to crisis situations. This map shows Russia's occupation of Ukraine's Donbas region prior to the invasion. Using this time series data from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, or ACLED, we can see how Russia's war machine rolled into Ukraine on February 24th and began laying waste to its sovereign territory. We knew that there would be an information vacuum, that Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine would lead to the unfortunate need for atrocity documentation, but that we could harness geospatial analytics to document these abuses remotely. And so CSO created the Conflict Observatory program, which uses many spatial data sources and open source investigation techniques to document these crimes. The work follows international standards so that any analysis conducted can be relied upon as evidence by justice and accountability mechanisms. We're using scientific methods to hold Russia accountable for its crimes. This dashboard shows the work of the Conflict Observatory to date. The Conflict Observatory is a fantastic team of teams comprised of nearly 70 subject matter and technical experts, including the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab, the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative, Planetscape AI, Quiet Professionals, and Esri. The teams began documenting war crimes and other atrocities using satellite imagery and other data sources. When the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe called for documentation support in early March, Yale rapidly responded to this request for information. Their report focused on hospitals and other medical facilities. This critical infrastructure is almost never considered to be a legitimate target of war. But this hospital in Mariupol shows the violations that were happening, such as the impact site from an artillery shell on the side of the hospital and other damage, as well as buses being used as blockades. As Russia's war in Ukraine dragged on, we began to hear rumors of the Kremlin's use of filtration operations, in which Russia's forces and its proxies detained, interrogated, and forcibly deported Ukrainians. Relying on open source investigation techniques, Yale was able to shed light on this weapon of war. They told the world that Russia's actions were not a normal condition or consequence of war, but a cruel and invasive system where civilians were taken into custody, families were separated, and civilians were detained, interrogated, and tortured. The Yale team mapped out this system across Donetsk Oblast, identifying key sites in the system like Bezymene, collecting satellite imagery and geolocating photos, videos, and textual evidence. As the work continued, it became apparent that traditional investigation techniques that were focused on single locations were not going to be sufficient to cope with the sheer number of events on the ground. We needed large-scale documentation at an extent that had never been attempted. Let's take a look at some examples of how the team is meeting this challenge. The Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative and its partners at the Virginia Museum of Natural History's Cultural Heritage Monitoring Lab and the University of Maryland have been using this dashboard to track potential damage to Ukrainian cultural heritage sites. Here's how they do their analysis. We know that Ukraine is rich in cultural heritage. The team developed a database of over 28,000 sites, far too many sites to monitor manually. To triage the entire country, they're using thermal detection data from NASA satellites. seen here in orange. The satellites detect heat signatures not just from fires, but from other conflict-related events like shelling. Next, they incorporate cropland areas into the analysis because agricultural burning is a standard practice in Ukraine. Using these layers, they quickly determine sites that might have been damaged. They're shown here in red. From there, we can task high-resolution satellite imagery to investigate individual sites, like the Lyman House of Culture, a community center and cultural hub for the city. The main building that housed a theater and a library with over 30,000 volumes was destroyed by shelling and fire on April 30th. And you can see the extensive fire damage to the building in this image from May the 6th. Using this process, the team can triage the entire country's cultural sites for damage. Another way we are monitoring large portions of the country is with innovative analytic services created by PlanetScape AI. This time series of Mariupol leverages AI and daily commercial satellite imagery to automatically detect when buildings are destroyed across eastern Ukraine, like this theater in the center of the city that was destroyed on March the 17th. Another service, called the Human Mobility Metric, is used to estimate population movements in Ukraine by leveraging location data from cell phones. The data you see here is aggregated into hex bins by week and compared to pre-invasion numbers. You can see how people were moving during different time periods. The red areas show where people were leaving, and the blue areas show where populations were increasing. This service provides a unique understanding of how populations are moving in eastern Ukraine, where data otherwise doesn't exist or is unreliable. This analytic service, along with data from ACLED, was used by the University of Maryland to produce new insights into the relationship between combatant activity and population movements. The largest X's you see were areas with more Russian events, and the circles are areas of Ukrainian military activity. The team found that armed activity initiated by Russia's forces is the main determinant of conflict-related displacement. As you can see, these data services and interdisciplinary collaboration are giving us new content to utilize in investigations to meet the scale and tempo challenge caused by Russia's brutal war of choice. The last thing I want to share with you is how we're using ArcGIS knowledge to support accountability mechanisms. We're building a tool to discover conflict observatory data to support investigation requests. Knowledge helps us understand the relationships between locations and events and other pieces of information. More accountability processes are now underway, and the teams are producing case files to support the search for justice. The Conflict Observatory is taking this ever-growing body of evidence and sharing it publicly. You can see all the latest reporting at conflictobservatory.org. The United States is committed to holding those accountable no matter how long it takes. The people of Ukraine demand and deserve justice. As global conflicts continue, the state
Thank you very much to Sean for that. And the content there we felt was best delivered by the audience there from earlier in the year. So yeah, adds to the conversations we had from the other presenters earlier. So just to sort of move into conclusion, what we've seen there from the example shared this morning is really the power of geospatial data science and the importance of bringing data together from multiple sources. So just to touch in with the theme of today being around AI technologies, yeah, we see it as being part of a broader set of spatial analytics, spatial statistics, and data science. made possible by tools, not all built by Esri. We connect into the big other, the tool repositories, open source repositories and scripting environments to make this possible. And ultimately, we build some deep learning models to share out there, but ultimately for others to enrich them, take them forward and localize them. So this slide just shares kind of examples around the different ways that data can come together, sort of regardless of source, size, type of data, complex, non-complex, visual, map-based, vector-based, raster-based, etc. So all this comes together to provide the rich analytics, which you've seen examples of over the last few minutes there. As we talk about AI itself, we don't see this as a standalone sort of capability. It's obviously emerging technology, so we see it emerging across the technology. Yes, in the analytical parts, but also in some of the helping users interact with the technology and also describe and share the outputs of the technology as well. So describing a map as we saw for those that joined this morning's session. So again, in the GeoAI term that we use, it doesn't matter where the data is coming from and what format it takes. And we've seen it being used in everything from textual-based analysis that ends up on a map, and map-based analysis that ends up as text. So with different components. So I think to conclude and echo or sort of move on from what Pat was saying this morning, we look at sort of citizen sensors. Really, it sort of integrates that no one person does everything, no one piece of technology, there's no one actor, no one organization. So technology integration, citizen integration, information sharing. Lee's when you mentioned, there's images out there that can't be used. We need to fix those kind of problems, and it's not a technology problem. It's broader than that. So ultimately, a system that has interoperability. We saw pictures coming in from one source that might be analyzed in another and shared out via a government platform or a social platform. I was in Nepal for the earthquake in 2015 and was part of the response team that then took the data coming from those citizen sensors, analyzed it, and then tried to help respond to the army and the international responders to therefore deliver aid in the right way. So, those things weren't planned, they just happened. And because there was a couple of people that just made it happen, and then it suddenly scaled up. Yeah, there were some learnings from it for sure, but each of these situations is different. So as Pat mentioned, the sort of pattern that we try and see coming from these different scenarios, obviously we hope they're never needed in conflict, but hopefully some of the learnings from other scenarios are used there and benefited from them. But ultimately, that data is coming in through a sensor, citizen sensors in this scenario. It's got to come somewhere with some organization. I won't say full-on standards, but some sort of organization to then make the most sense of it, maybe using some more advanced analytics to get the real insights and then get it back out to decision makers or back out to a citizen so they can go left or right, somewhere safe, somewhere that's open, not closed, etc. So just to be sure people are aware, we've been talking about technology. We're very passionate about making sure it's where it needs to be. So people can follow up on the links here, but there's a lot of information on humanitarian GIS patterns, hubs, open datas, templates for some of these solutions. So if it's urgent, you can click a button and it's done for the sort of the basic citizen collection tools we've shown. They're all kind of wrapped up into template solutions that can be very quickly deployed. We have non-profit programs, etc., around the world that are there to make sure this technology is used where it's really needed in times of preparedness, but also response and disaster. As we mentioned earlier, both of what we're talking about here about open science and AI are very emerging topics. So if you want to keep up to speed, then there's a couple of links there to stay in touch. And as we wrapped up this morning, ultimately we see, we talk about this today, but these things unfortunately will continue to happen, both natural and man-made. So making sure future generations know about these tools so they could be better prepared in advance, avoid some of the scenarios we've seen, etc. Then we highly value the importance of education there. So some materials around that. So to conclude, we've been talking about environmental context, environment in a number of contexts. Understanding, monitoring it, tracking it during times of conflict is key to help them restore it during other times, and also then be able to share information and stories around the impacts to inform decisions. But again, the technical and thematic literacy is key to help everybody take the geographic approach and protect the environment in its entirety. Thank you very much to our hosts, and thank you to the other speakers.
Thank you, Matthew. And and also to the other Esri speakers, Pat and Sean. Now, I just wanted to, just give me a moment. Now, I just have a few questions for our Esri speakers, and starting with Pat, I'd like to ask her, where does she see governments and organizations expanding their work in this topic? Are they really promoting citizen science? I have to ask myself.
Well, I do think, well, the US government, I know they are moving forward with more citizen science. They actually had to pass some law or regulation that allowed agencies to do that as long as it's documented and they have some format and structure around it. So I think we will see more of that. I also see more public-private partnerships emerging, and I think this could be another component in the public-private partnerships with government, with academia, with the nonprofits. They are often the ones that are organizing the feet on the street. They are finding those passionate people that have the interest and the ability and the commitment to be contributors to make a difference. So I think we're going to see more. I think we're going to see more and more of that.
Thank you, Pat. And just moving on to Sean, I'd like to ask Sean, how does he see technology innovation continuing to evolve?
Yeah, so I think one of the key areas is around the citizen science work is there's always a lot of question about the performance, the stability, the quality of that. With AI as part of the process, I think we're going to see improvements in quality. We're also working with a lot of groups that are already doing that to go through a qualification process. So each data set is checked in 3 different ways or from multiple sources and validated before it becomes available to the general community. iNaturalist is a good example of that right now. They've got over 100 million point locations for species that have been found, and those are now being all qualified by at least 3 research sources before they're released to the public.
It crossed my mind when I was looking at when Pat was presenting. If we're all taking out our mobile devices and taking photos of whatever as a citizen science contribution, what crossed my mind is the whole ISO community. Are they looking at this whole area of putting a very loose standard on images that are being, taken and perhaps uploaded onto various platforms? I mean, surely that this is something that ISO could knock many decades out of debating and maybe putting what I would call a very loose framework type standard. Have they looked at this at all? I'm completely, again, I confess ignorance in this area, but.
Yeah. So we have seen that in some forms of sensors. We haven't seen it for photos yet, but we've seen it for things like with Landsat, you have temperature mapping that happens every day across the entire planet, but that actually has to be locally checked. And they've actually turned people into citizen science with an application on your phone that also has a sensor that they certify for correctness and calibration.
Truthing.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, moving on to finally Matthew, our last speaker from Esri. Matthew, you mentioned a repeatable pattern. Where else do you see this emerging?
Yeah, as I think Pat alluded to, that sort of we see it in different areas. I mean, an example that was an environment one, I think people may remember the Iceland volcano that erupted a few years ago and disrupted flights across that. And I know the British Geological Survey then sent little kits out to houses in the UK to do little soil samples, which then gave them an indication of how the ash cloud had been dispersed across the area. And what they openly admitted afterwards is that they could have never have done that. So without citizen science and citizen sensors, they would have never truly understood the environmental impact or the spread of the ash over croplands and gardens and so forth. So yeah, I think the key point there is that they're admitting that they couldn't have done that without this kind of engagement. And I think, you know, bird societies, wildlife societies, they get there's sort of a two-way element there. Some of these things people see, oh, why should I take my time to do that? So I think going back to Lee's storytelling is making sure there's a, I say incentive, but an encouragement of why it's good to do that. So I think that's where we'll see this pattern continuing.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Are there any other questions from the floor for our three Esri presenters? No takers? Anybody online? Anybody online would like to ask a question of Esri? Victor, have you put your hand? No, you have put your hand up. Victor, over to you.
First of all, thank you very much for very impressive presentations. And I believe these technologies will help us in advancing research and getting full picture of what is going on different parts of the world. But I have very, very specific, very practical questions. You presented some very impressive example of applications related to Ukraine. Apart of satellite data, what kind of data sources have you used to adjust, to compile these results? What data sources another from?
Who'd like to take that?
Yeah.
So in the Conflict Observatory, ACLED was one of the sources for the conflict information itself. But as we go thinking about the environmental topics, sensors definitely from remote sensing were one part of it, but also FAO had a lot of information on the ground around things like crop data that we used as the training sets that go into that crop suitability planning. And then also the other information that I think was mentioned is they were collecting cell phone information in real time on the ground to look at that human migration pattern during conflict areas.
Okay, thank you.
Victor, do you have?
No, thank
Do you have any other questions while you have the floor?
Thank you.
Olena, anything? Is Olena still with us?
Yes, I'm with you. Thank you. That
Yes.
was
What-
very impressive, and actually for doing what you're doing. But maybe the question that I might have, Esri is not the only organization that is doing, maybe not, like I haven't seen anything as comprehensive. However, how would you see cooperation for this post-war environmental assessment that I was presenting? How do you see cooperation of different companies, organizations who are now collecting data, developing maps? I mean, do you have anything in mind how that would work? Because obviously, you know, different organizations have different data. You better understand this business, but do you have an idea? Can you describe how you see this cooperation so that finally Ukraine has all the data that is available? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Elena. So I guess a couple of points. I mean, so some of what we've showed, I mean, all of what we showed has been using Esri technology, but Esri is the organization instead of doing a lot of this work, as you saw some presenters. But to answer your question, what we champion and what we're aware of happening is, you know, even throughout the conflict, the Ukrainian government and mapping agency have remained active, and they are working on what we call a integrated geospatial information framework, or people might have called NSDIs, National Spatial Data Infrastructures previously. And they are sort of the backbone or the foundation layer where a lot of these data sets I would highly encourage are then linked to or shared to. And from a technology perspective, that doesn't mean you have to actually bring them all into one place anymore. As long as you have a registry of where they are, then they can be linked to. So I would, my recommendation with, I can share the names with you, but the head of the mapping agency there was recently presenting on this that framework remains so that there's a kind of common geographic language and referencing system that can be used for any activities, whether it be environmental or reconstruction activities, continued monitoring of activities on the ground, and then the post-disaster assessments that you've mentioned. So I highly recommend linking in with the mapping agency. I forget the acronym, but I'll share the details with you.
Thank you, Matthew. So,
Thank you.
Olena, as you know, you have been working on UNEP GEO, Global Environment Outlook process in the past. Whenever this post-conflict assessment of Ukraine is up and running, we obviously have to have a mix of national level players, many of whom I can see online on our screen, and also international players. And of course, you have to, of course, take the technology sector into account in terms of providing satellite imagery, GIS applications that will enhance this assessment report. As I said earlier, the sooner the conflict ends, the better for all of us, and especially for all of you good folks based in Ukraine who took time out today to be with us. And our hearts go out to you as well as our minds. We will engage the relevant stakeholders in this post-conflict assessment. We know we have to do that to produce a quality product. And as I said after the last event this morning on the climate action, we also want to keep this collaboration going after COP28 ends tomorrow or tomorrow night or whenever, yeah? So we want to keep this group engaged. This has just been really wetting our feet, so to speak, in a very small way. But we have good people here in Ukraine who are eager to work with us and they need help. They also, of course, have on the ground access to data because they're there in the middle of the conflict, as you can see. So we will make sure that whatever collaboration starts today will continue into the future. Are there any other questions for the ESRI presenters? I want Victor and Olena to stay online because we will take a family photograph before we leave the room here. So don't leave us yet. So last call for questions from our online participants.
I just want to,
Hello, sorry, who was that?
Jerry, it was.
Oh, sorry. Pat, yes. Go.
I just wanted to thank you for bringing the group together.
Oh,
I think it's an important topic all around this morning and this afternoon. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Pat, for your kind words. Well, if there are no more questions, as I said, Victor and Olena, please stay with us. If there are no more questions, then it just falls upon me to say a big thank you to all our presenters who gave excellent presentations and thought-provoking presentations. I need to look at that video again, by the way, because I was distracted and I missed 1 minute of it. We will share the link for all presentations this morning and also this afternoon. So we'll make sure that everybody has access, and I think both side events were also recorded. So we'll share that link as well. So a big thank you to all our presenters. This would not have worked without having you here today. Secondly, I want to thank the government of Ukraine for hosting us here in their pavilion. If we didn't have a room, we wouldn't have any side events. And I really am appreciative to the government of Ukraine for hosting us, and also to NECU, the National Ecological Center of Ukraine, who actually sorted out the registration of all of us. As you know, we have here at COP28 a blue zone and a green zone. So everybody had to have blue zone access in order to be here physically. So Neku and Maharita, who I know flew last night to Berlin, I'd like to, in absentia, thank her for all of the support she's given us. We've had a lot of email exchanges over the last 2 months. And we're very grateful to her team as well, who were actually managing the pavilion. And before I finish, Sasha, are you there? Can you please come out where we can see you? So you're not a hidden gremlin behind the technology. Sasha, come out, come out here and just take a. Sasha, he's been making everything happen behind the scenes. He does work for the UN Global Compact in Ukraine, so I want to thank him for his technical support both this morning and this afternoon, and also Margot for helping out. Now, we are going to finish with a group photograph. So we have our presenters here in the room, and we have 2 people on the screen. I hope this is going to work.